Hi, everyone, and welcome to the next installment in our Innovation in Mining series. I'm thrilled to have Belinda Clemenson with us. She is a thought leader around engaging women in mining and really unlocking what they have to offer as a form of innovation. So part of that is moving toward inclusive culture. So a lot of the time, people hear about innovation in mining and they might automatically think about machinery or think about AI, or think about different types of technologies. Now, Belinda has had, um, lots of experience and lots of success helping mining companies innovate from another angle. And that is by making their cultures more inclusive. So she's worked with dozens of women, in fact, who are the current and future leaders of mining companies. She has been an indispensable resource to many mining companies who are looking to elevate their women leaders in mining. And she's seen firsthand how they can drive change within their companies. And she's even written a book on the ways that women can lead from within industries, even when they're not in the majority. And her book is called Leadership, Saving the World, Why Everything Gets Better with When Women Lead. And I think you have a copy of it on the shelf behind you there, don't you, Belinda?
I do, yes.
Amazing. Well, welcome to our innovation series. We're so happy to have you here.
Thanks so much, Erica. It's great to be here. I'm excited for this conversation.
Fantastic. So, I mean, we hear a lot about women in mining and how, representation leads to innovation. We do want to get really specific here and be really real about this because it's not as simple as just add women and get innovation. It is so important that companies, especially mining companies that maybe haven't had a lot of women historically in their workforce, really work to create the proper conditions. And so, talk to us, Belinda, around what those conditions look like and what happens when they're not there. Let's maybe start with that as the part that we want to avoid.
Yeah, well, I think, what makes this an innovation topic is that whenever we start to see change in our workforce or change in our market or change in our society, we have to respond to that change, right? That's part of creating sustainable businesses.
Mm,
And so when we look at the change in the workforce, that's where we're starting to see some really dynamic changes happening that mining companies are responding to. And so one of those changes is that we are starting to see more women in the industry. The number is moving in the right direction. It's not going that fast yet, but I think this is part of the conversation about what are the conditions or the cultural requirements that make sure that you can attract and retain and develop and engage those women. And so obviously we can look at this from the very sort of most fundamental thing around representation, right? Do you have enough representation, enough diversity of representation in your organization that somebody from the outside could look in and say, yeah, I can see myself here, right? I could
mm.
see that this is a company that I could work at. So that's sort of, a really fundamental piece in terms of the conditions that need to be there. You just need to be able to look at your numbers, and that's easy data for most organizations to get a hold of and say, where can we start to increase these numbers? The other thing is a bit of a mindset shift, though, because it's not increasing the numbers for its own sake. It is because there is a lot of benefit to creating this more diverse workforce. And one of the benefits that comes from that is really we start to see this broadening of perspectives, which means that new ideas get placed on the table and we start to see innovation, not only in terms of what we normally think of as culture, but in other areas, things like safety, innovations. And there are lots of examples of where when we have a more diverse workforce, then we sort of have these really interesting, innovative outcomes coming out of it. So representation's a piece. Certainly, most organizations have really strong codes of conduct and policies that govern our behaviors. The question is, are we leveraging those policies well, right? And is
Mm,
that translating into
yeah,
behavior at scale? And so if it's not translating into behavior at scale, then you have a culture problem because culture is behavior at scale.
yeah.
So what people do, what people say is your culture, not necessarily what's written in your policies or on your values. And so building alignment between those two things is key. Another thing that we see is you need to use the data that you have, right? So maybe you need to be doing a pay equity review. That's another sort of gap or
Mm,
barrier that we'll often see, or even a career trajectory review, right? Are there particular places where women in your organization are getting stalled as they're going through their career progression? So there's lots of sort of barriers like that definitely come up. And the other piece I think is we always think of it as like we can develop women and engage them, and we're going to get lots of benefits from that. But if they keep coming back to a culture that is not also developing, they're just going to hit the same barriers. And
mm.
so we need to be investing and developing all leaders in an organization, not just the women. Yes, we want to develop the women, but all leaders to build these inclusive leadership mindsets and skill sets so that they can create that culture that you're looking for and the one that's really aligned with your values and your policies and your code of conduct.
Wow. Thank you, Belinda, for just dropping so many important pieces of wisdom on us here. I love what you're saying about the culture is what happens day to day. It's not just what you wrote down in your policy one time, that people get the training on the first day and then there's something very different that happens in the lunchroom, in the in the break time, in the drive room, that kind of thing. It really does have to be integrated. And I think sometimes when we talk about women in workplaces where they're not the majority, um, we can sort of back off a little bit and say, oh, well, maybe they don't like being there. Maybe that's why they're leaving, or maybe they don't have what it takes. Maybe they would be more comfortable working in an office setting or that kind of thing. We can sometimes, without meaning to, make these interpretations or these assumptions for why the women aren't staying now. And what I hear you saying is a very different approach. It's like, let's move forward, let's keep investing, let's make it work with these women. And I believe you have the track record to demonstrate that's possible.
Absolutely. And we know that, when we innovate for one user group, so let's say we're innovating for women in this case, but this is true when we innovate for any user group. So if we start to broaden our lens a little bit and we'll say like, let's innovate our organizations to make them more inclusive to women. We see that the benefits that come from that are actually benefits for all people. And
Mm,
so, if you have more women in the industry and now we need to think about parental leaves differently,
mm,
that is a benefit for all parents of all genders, right? If you have more women in your organization, you have to think about potentially different safety practices or operational practices to accommodate women's different body types, for example. That often translates into reduced injuries across the board for all people of all genders,
yeah.
right? And so these innovations, we think of them as accommodating a certain group of people, when in fact, we're creating these much broader benefits for everyone.
Mm,
And we see this happen in the women who work with us in our leadership program all the time, in terms of when they come in, they have a lot more potential and a lot more to contribute than they may be doing at that moment, right? And so the development piece is huge because it helps them to really step into the leadership role. It helps them step into the skills and capabilities that they bring to the table. And it takes them to that next level of also having the really strong human centered and values based leadership skills, right? How do I lead teams? How do I manage conflict, which is inevitable?
yeah.
How do I leverage my emotional intelligence as a leader, as a human being, when I'm leading teams or cross functional projects? How do I manage change, right? Recognizing that people are responding to change in various ways. And so it's putting all those skill sets together. And we've seen some really amazing outcomes, not the least of which is retention. And
Yeah.
so you think about like the cost of attrition, right? There's the cost of the immediate loss, right, of a person who fills a certain role in your organization. The cost of hiring and retraining somebody to take the position. But when it comes to women, for example, there's also a cost to your overall organizational metrics, right? And most mining companies right now are really aware of their numbers when it comes to how many women they have and how that compares to the norm, right? And am I on
Hmm.
track? Are we on track or not? And so when we hire these women, these highly skilled, educated women, and we are not creating the right conditions to keep them, right? We're not investing in them, we're not developing them, we're not working on our culture, then they're going to leave. And
Yeah.
so this retention piece is critical. But some of the other outcomes we've seen, in addition to this really high level of retention of women who work in our programs, where companies invest in them in this way, recognition, being invited to participate in really high consequence project, cross-functional, cross-jurisdiction project work. Um, Promotion obviously is another piece. I'm not gonna say almost every woman who's in our program has been promoted, but in the mining industry, absolutely. So
Wow.
whether you're getting a promotion this year or next year, that's one question. That's a very interesting question that everyone should be asking about their career, especially if they feel like they're performing at that level, right? And a lot of women don't, especially because they're, probably the only one or one of very few in their space. But it's also, where am I going with my career? That's another big question that women want answered, right? So it's not just about the immediate, like what's happening this year or next year. It's about, what is the overall plan for me here? Because if it's a dead end, I'm not staying.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of our audience members, no doubt, can relate to the pain of hiring people in general, maybe especially hiring promising young women
Yeah,
and hoping that they will stay and that they will become the leaders that can succeed today's leaders, and instead being disappointed when they leave.
yeah,
And what you're offering here is, I think, a bit of hope as well as a very practical prescription to say that it is possible for you to move the needle and to keep those women around more than not. So tell
absolutely.
me what that looks like. I mean, you mentioned a leadership program for women leaders, and you have some other things that you do with mining companies that are looking to move the needle on their numbers.
Yeah. So, I mean, really, the Women's Leadership Development Program is probably the core piece that we do. And so I would say we're sitting probably 80% of our participants in that program are from traditionally male dominated industries like mining. Mining is our biggest industry that we work with, and we have done for many years now. And so that program's really about taking that woman who's sitting in a position of potential and helping her build out the skill sets, the career path, make the right connections within her organization, right? Build her network internally and externally. But another really big outcome from this program is women finding their voice, their leadership voice.
Mm,
And so whenever we have a group of people who are in the minority, right, consistently in the minority, like women in mining always are, it is really hard to share a dissenting perspective. We kind of get
yeah.
amalgamated into whatever the sort of, dominant themes of the day might be. And if we're over here saying, yeah, but there might be a different way, there might be a better way, right? Here's the innovation coming back in. It's really hard to get our voices heard. And so we have to often be quite strategic about how we do that. It's not just about, we know that women's voices don't get heard at the table, at the leadership tables, anywhere to the same degree
Yeah.
that male voices do. And so when women show up in those places, it's not just as easy as raising our hand and saying, I have an opinion. There's often a lot more that we have to bring to the table. So it's learning, how do we navigate those conversations so that we do get to bring the innovative ideas that we have, right? And we do get to then bring the benefits of this diverse perspective to our organizations.
That's great. Well, it sounds like this is a very collaborative approach that you're taking, Belinda, when you're working with the mining leaders, many of whom are men at this point, right?
Yeah.
Um, and we're not in a mode of saying, well, you should be doing this, or it's bad that you're doing that. Like, it's really about bringing out the best processes and the best practices for everyone, and knowing that that does take time, and we're seeing some progress. And it sounds like, the program that you've created really does accelerate great outcomes when it comes to keeping and nurturing women leaders in mining.
We've had some really great results. We also do inclusive leadership training for all leaders because we know that that's a huge development need. A lot of leaders of all genders just do not feel equipped, right, to
Mm,
have those conversations with people, or to even, understand what would it take to create a more inclusive culture in my team or in my operation. So yeah, and the partnership piece is huge. This is, This is really about opportunity. That's how we look at it, right? This is an opportunity for these women, absolutely, in the mining industry. These are great jobs. These are amazing careers. We want women to have access to that. But it's also this opportunity for mining organizations because of the innovation piece, right? When we have these different
Yes.
players at the table, then we start to innovate things like process, maybe even the way that we do things or the kinds of things that we do, the way we look at our business, right, the way we manage safety in our business. So that is the value of having these varying perspectives at the table. And certainly, in mining, with our numbers of women still really low, this is a massive opportunity, I think, to transform the industry for the better.
Well, thank you, Belinda, for bringing that hopeful, action-oriented perspective. And I so appreciate as well how you brought up how this can benefit everyone. Like this isn't pie that gets distributed, it takes away from one group and gives it to another. It's more like we're raising the bar for what's possible in the industry in general. It really does benefit everyone when we're able to attract and keep more women leaders in mining.
Absolutely. And I can give you many examples of that. Maybe that's for another day. But yeah, that when we innovate for women, we definitely create systems that are better for all.
Amazing. Well, that sounds like a great cliffhanger to end on. If anyone wants to know more about the impact that you've had with your mining clients, success stories that you on what you've created already and how you did it, explore maybe how they could bring that approach into their programs, they should get in touch with you and find out more.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Erica.
Thank you.